Deep within the sapphire depths of the unknown, a revelation is waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to dive. Experience a journey of discovery that will change your perspective on what is truly possible. Hit subscribe now and let the deep blue reveal its greatest secret.
I was in the middle of a job site walkthrough in Bozeman when my phone rang. It was a Montana number I didn't have saved, and normally I would have let it go to voicemail. I was standing in the shell of what would eventually be someone's kitchen, and my foreman was in the middle of explaining a framing issue with the load-bearing wall. I held up a finger and stepped outside. The voice on the other end was a woman, maybe mid-50s, measured and calm in the way that people are when they're trying not to alarm you. She said, "Are you Michael Shea?" I said yes. She said, "My name is Judy Bertram. I'm the estate attorney your father used for his will. I'm sorry to be calling you at work, but there's something I found during the property transfer process, and I think you need to come to the house in person before we go any further." She paused, "And I'd ask that you come by yourself if you can, just for now." I told my foreman I had a family situation. He nodded the way men nod when they know enough not to ask. "My name is Michael Shea. I'm 52 years old. I run a small residential construction company in Bozeman, Montana, with 7 employees and more work than we can handle most seasons. I am not a man who is easily rattled. I have been on job sites where things went wrong in ways that cost money and time and once nearly cost someone a hand. And I have learned over the years to slow my breathing and think before I move. I did not manage that on the drive to my father's house. My father, Warren Shea, died 8 months before that phone call. He was 79. He'd had a series of small strokes over the prior 2 years, and the last one had taken enough of his motor function that he'd spent his final 4 months in memory care at a facility called Ponderosa Ridge, about 12 miles east of Billings. He'd been sharp right up until the strokes, the kind of sharp that made the decline harder to watch. He had been an electrician for 31 years, then a building inspector for another 14. He knew how things were supposed to be put together, and he knew when something had been done wrong. My mother had passed when I was 26. It had been my father and me after that, and my younger sister Jenna, who now lives outside of Portland with her family. Our father had never remarried. He had dated a woman named Ellen for a few years in his 60s, but that had ended quietly and without drama. He was not a man who needed much company. He had his vegetable garden, his wood shop, and his Friday night poker game with 4 men from his old job. That was enough for him. When he died, he left the house to Jenna and me equally. It was a ranch-style house in Billings on a half-acre lot built in 1974, the kind of house that needed work but had good bones. We'd agreed to sell, split the proceeds, and have me oversee the process since I was in the trades and closer to home. Judy Bertram had been handling the estate paperwork. I had spoken to her twice by phone and found her efficient and thorough. I had not expected her to call me and ask me to come alone. It took me 2 hours and 20 minutes to get to Billings. I drove the speed limit. I am not sure why. Judy Bertram was standing in the driveway when I pulled up. She was a tall woman with silver hair cut short and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She shook my hand and thanked me for coming. She said she wanted to show me something before she explained it. We went inside. The house had been emptied of most of my father's furniture by then. The rooms hollow in the way that emptied houses always are, the walls holding the shapes of where things had hung, the carpet showing the footprints of furniture that was no longer there. I had been in twice since his death to sort through belongings. I knew the house the way you know a place you grew up in, by instinct rather than memory, every corner familiar without thinking about it. Judy led me to the back bedroom, the one my father had used as an office. The closet in that room had a high shelf, the kind that runs the full width of the closet and sits too high for most people to see easily without standing on something. She had found it, she said, while doing a walkthrough to assess the property for the estate filing. She had climbed up to check the shelf and found it pushed to the very back against the wall. It was a metal fireproof document box, the kind you buy at an office supply store, with a key lock on the front. The box was dusty on top, but the lock was not rusted. My father used the same key for things like that. He told me once, years ago, that he kept a spare key to his important boxes on the same ring as his workshop key. The workshop key was on the hook by the back door where it had always been. I went and got it. The second smallest key on the ring opened the box. Inside there were documents, an accordion folder stuffed with papers, a small spiral notebook, the kind with a hard black cover, and a sealed white envelope with my name on it. Not Jenna's name, mine. I had not spoken to Judy for several minutes. She was standing in the doorway of the closet. She said, "I didn't look at anything inside. I thought you should be the first one to." She asked if I wanted her to give me some time alone. I told her yes. I sat down on the closet floor. My father's house, his empty office, his keys in my hand. I sat there for a moment before I opened anything. I opened the notebook first. My father's handwriting was the deliberate, angled print of a man who had spent decades filling out inspection forms. Every letter the same size, every line straight, without ruling. The first page was dated about 3 years before he died, a few months before his first stroke. It started without introduction, the way a man starts something he's been thinking about for a while. It said, "Spoke to Gordon again today. He says the numbers are right, but they don't feel right. Going to ask for a full statement this week. Gordon Trask." I knew the name. Gordon Trask had been my father's financial advisor for, I later confirmed, 16 years. He managed my father's retirement accounts, what was left of his pension rollover from the union, and a small investment portfolio my father had built up over decades of careful living. My father had trusted Gordon Trask completely. He had mentioned him at holidays the way you mention a doctor you're happy with. The kind of quiet endorsement that means you stopped asking questions. The second entry was 2 weeks after the first. It said, "Statement came. There's a management fee for Q3. I don't remember authorizing. $6,400. Called the office. The assistant said Gordon would call back. He hasn't." I kept reading. Over the next 14 months, my father had documented 11 separate transactions he believed were unauthorized. Fees described in the statements with terms like portfolio optimization assessment and quarterly rebalancing service, amounts ranging from $3,200 to $18,000. He had added them up in the margin of 1 page, in pen. With the careful arithmetic of a man who grew up before calculators were common, the total was just over $112,000. I had to put the notebook down. I stood up and walked out of the closet and stood in the middle of the empty office for a minute. Then I went back and kept reading. My father had gone to Gordon's office in person. The notebook described the meeting in the flat, factual language he used for everything. Gordon said the fees were disclosed in the original agreement, said the language was in the addendum. He seemed calm. He offered me coffee. I said no. I asked to see the addendum. He showed me a page. I didn't recognize it. Told him I wanted a copy. He made one. It didn't feel right. The next entry pulled out my copy of the original agreement from the file cabinet. No addendum. My copy ends on page 9. His copy has a page 9A. I did not sign a page 9A. I did not sign a page 9A. I know what I signed. I'd grown up watching my father do inspections. I'd gone with him on Saturdays sometimes, as a kid, watching him move through unfinished houses with a clipboard and a flashlight. He would crouch down and look at things from angles other people didn't bother with. He had an inspector's mind, which is to say he believed that the discrepancy you almost didn't notice was usually the one that mattered most. He had noticed the discrepancy. I went back to the notebook. The next section changed. About 8 months before the first stroke, my father had started writing about his health. Fatigue that he couldn't shake, he wrote, headaches behind the left eye, dizzy some mornings. He had gone to his doctor, a man named Dr. Callum Reedern, who had run blood work and checked his blood pressure and told him that at 76, some of what he was describing was to be expected. His blood pressure was slightly elevated. He was put on a mild medication. The symptoms didn't improve. Then there was an entry that made me read the same 3 lines 4 times before I kept going. It said, "Been thinking about the supplements Gordon's wife recommended. Started taking them almost a year ago now. Charlotte said they were good for circulation and energy. She gave me the first bottle herself. I have 4 bottles left in the medicine cabinet. Going to stop taking them for a while and see what happens. Charlotte Trask." Gordon's wife. I had met her once at a Chamber of Commerce dinner my father had brought me 2 years ago, before my mother died. She had been cheerful and well-dressed and had talked about their property in Whitefish. I had not thought about her since. I went to the medicine cabinet in my father's bathroom. There were 4 amber plastic bottles on the second shelf, the kind that looked like supplements from a health food store. The label said Cardio Support Plus. No brand I recognized, no barcode, handwritten lot numbers. I didn't touch them. I went back to the notebook. My father had stopped the supplements 5 months before his first stroke. He had written 3 weeks after stopping. Headaches are less, still tired but different tired. Going to talk to Reardon. Then, 2 months before the first stroke, I think I have to go to the police. I've been too slow about this. I kept hoping I was wrong about Gordon. I've known him 16 years. He came to your mother's service. He shook my hand. I kept telling myself the paperwork was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. And then the last entry in the notebook, dated 6 weeks before his first stroke. My father's handwriting slightly larger than usual, the letters not quite as even. It said, "I'm writing this for Michael. I think he'll be the one to find it. He knows how to finish things." The box has everything. The documents are in order. Don't go to Gordon alone. Don't let Jenna go either. She'll want to, and she'll be angry enough to say things that will ruin the case. Call a lawyer first. I'm sorry I didn't move faster. I thought I had more time. I sat on the floor of that closet for a long time. When I came out, Judy Bertram was sitting in the kitchen on a folding chair she must have found somewhere. She had made coffee in a small travel French press she'd apparently brought herself. She handed me a cup without asking if I wanted one. I told her what was in the notebook, had told her all of it, start to finish. She did not interrupt. She was an estate attorney, not a criminal lawyer, but she had been doing this work for a long time, and I could tell by the way she listened. That very little of it surprised her in the way it surprised me. When I finished, she said, "Michael, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not contact Gordon Trask. Do not mention this to anyone outside of your immediate family until you have spoken to a criminal attorney. What you've described, if the documents support it, is serious enough that the sequence matters. Every step from here matters." I asked her if she thought my father had been deliberately harmed. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I think you need to let people with the right tools answer that question. But yes, I think that's a question that needs to be asked." I drove back to Bozeman that night. I didn't sleep. At 6 in the morning, I called my sister. Jenna is 2 years younger than me. She is a social worker, and she has the kind of temperament that work either produces or selects for, which is to say she is calm under pressure and furious at injustice, and she knows which context calls for which. I told her everything. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Tell me what you need me to do." I told her not to do anything yet. I told her I was going to get a lawyer first, the way Dad said. She didn't like that. I knew she wouldn't. I found a criminal attorney in Billings, a man named Howard Pell, who had a reputation in the state for financial crimes cases. He had been a federal prosecutor before going into private practice. I drove back to Billings the next day and sat in his office for 2.5 hours and told him everything and handed him the accordion folder and the notebook and the key to the box. Howard was methodical and hard to read. He went through the documents while I sat there, not skimming, actually reading. When he finished, he said, "Your father built a very strong foundation here. This is organized, this is dated. This will matter." He contacted the Montana Department of Justice Securities Division within the week. A financial crimes investigator, a woman named Special Agent Patricia Odell, took the case. She reviewed the documents, the notebook, the account statements, and then she took the supplement bottles. She had them sent to a toxicology lab in Missoula that the state used for investigations. The results came back 41 days later. The supplements contained a compound called coumarin, a substance that occurs naturally in certain plants and is harmless in the trace amounts found in things like cinnamon, but toxic in sustained doses, particularly to liver function and blood vessel integrity. Prolonged ingestion at the levels present in those capsules, the toxicologist wrote, could cause progressive vascular damage, including symptoms consistent with small vessel disease and elevated stroke risk in elderly patients. My father had been taking them for 11 months before he stopped. His first stroke had come 5 months after he stopped. The toxicologist said the damage from that kind of prolonged exposure didn't necessarily stop when the exposure did. I don't know how to describe what it felt like to read that report. I'm not sure I should try. There are some things where the words you reach for feel too small for what you're carrying, and you end up just setting them down. Gordon Trask was arrested on a Thursday morning in March. The charges were securities fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft by deception. The financial crimes investigation had turned up a pattern that went beyond my father's accounts. There were 4 other clients, all elderly, all with similar unauthorized fee structures. The total across all accounts exceeded $600,000. The supplement investigation took longer. The Coumadin levels were significant, but the causal chain, the direct line between the pills and my father's strokes, was harder to establish in a criminal court than it was to understand in a hospital room. Howard told me from the beginning to prepare for that part to be complicated. He was right. What the investigation also found, and this is the part I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count, was that Gordon had not acted entirely alone. My father had a neighbor, a man named Walt Geary, who had lived across the street for 11 years. Walt was the kind of neighbor my father had genuinely liked. They had talked over the fence. Walt had helped him with yard work after my mother died. He had driven my father to a cardiology appointment once, when I hadn't been able to get there in time. The investigation found that Walt had given Gordon detailed information about my father's financial situation. Over a period of almost 2 years, the payments to Walt came through a shell account. Gordon had set up under his brother-in-law's name, small amounts, $1,200 here, $1,500 there. Walt had told himself, he said in his statement, that he was just answering questions about a friend, that he hadn't known what Gordon was going to do with the information. My father had written about Walt in the notebook. Near the end, in the slightly uneven handwriting of the later entries, he had written, "I think Walt knows something about this. I don't know how much. He asked me once how much the house was worth and another time about the accounts, and I told him more than I should have because I trusted him. I don't want to say it out loud yet." He had not said it out loud. He had written it down and put it in a box in a closet and hoped I would find it in time to do something with it. Walt Geary pled to a charge of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. He received a suspended sentence and 3 years of supervised probation. He moved out of the house across the street before his sentencing. I have not seen him since. Gordon Trask was convicted on 8 of the 12 counts against him. He is currently serving a 6-year sentence at the Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge. The civil recovery process, which Howard pursued simultaneously to a separate action, resulted in a judgment of approximately $340,000 against Trask's remaining assets, including the property in Whitefish. Jenna and I split the recovered amount with the 4 other affected families, at Howard's recommendation. It seemed right. The supplement charges, the criminal negligence case tied to my father's health, were ultimately not brought to trial. The causal chain wasn't tight enough for the standard the prosecutor needed. I understood that legally. I sat with it for a long time before I understood it in any other way. I have not fully resolved how I feel about Walt Geary. I have thought about it more than I would like. He is not the same as Gordon. He did not design the scheme, did not create the fake addendum, did not give my father pills with a slow poison in them. He answered questions about a neighbor he thought he understood and did not let himself think too hard about why someone was paying him to answer questions. That is not the same thing as what Gordon did. It is also not nothing. It is its own kind of betrayal. The kind that happens at the ordinary level of daily life. The neighbor you trust because they helped you carry something heavy once and they waved at you from the driveway every morning. My father knew. He wrote it down. He wrote, "I told him more than I should have because I trusted him." After everything was settled, or as settled as these things ever get, Jenna and I sold the house. It took 8 months to close. I had kept the woodshop intact through that whole period, and in the last weeks before we handed over the keys, I spent some time in there on weekends. My father's tools were organized the way his handwriting was organized, the same deliberate order, every tool on its hook, every surface cleared at the end of a session. I am not much of a woodworker. He had tried to teach me when I was a teenager, and I had been impatient and uninterested. I made a small shelf in those last weeks. It's not good, the joinery is off, and one of the sides isn't quite square. My father would have taken one look at it and handed me a plane and shown me what I'd done wrong. I kept it anyway. It sits in my office at the job site now. When I look at it, I don't think about how bad the joinery is. The envelope my father left me, the sealed one with my name on it, had 4 pages inside. Most of it is private, and the way that things a father writes to a son are private, the accumulated weight of 30 years of the particular closeness that comes after loss. But toward the end, he wrote something I have returned to often enough that I can quote it without looking at it now. He wrote, "You've always been the one who finished what he started. I want you to know I didn't tell you about this while it was happening because I kept thinking I could handle it myself. You know how I am. I didn't want to drag you into something I might have been wrong about. I wasn't wrong. I was also wrong to wait." And then, in the last paragraph, the people who can hurt you most are the ones you've already decided to trust. I decided to trust Gordon because he came recommended and he was good at his job for 10 years and he came to your mother's service. Those are real things. They're just not enough. Check the work. That's what I always told my crews. It doesn't matter how good a man's reputation is, you still check the work. I think about that most days, about how trust, real trust, the kind that's been built over time and earned through consistency, is one of the most important things a life can hold. And about how the people who want to exploit that trust know exactly how to position themselves inside it. They don't look like strangers. They look like the financial advisor who shook your hand at your wife's funeral. They look like the neighbor who drove you to your cardiology appointment when your son couldn't make it. My father spent his entire career checking other people's work. He knew better than almost anyone that appearances and reality are two different things, that a wall can look perfectly finished and be hiding something dangerous inside it. He knew it in his bones, and he still trusted the wrong people because they were patient and they were familiar and they had built their position inside his life carefully over years. He documented everything when he finally knew. He organized it and locked it and left it in a place he thought I would find it. He was right about that. If there is one thing I have carried out of all of it, it's something my father understood better than he was able to protect himself from, which is a hard and honest thing to admit about a man I admired. He understood that your reputation as a careful person does not protect you. It makes you more valuable to someone who knows how to use it. The safeguard is not being careful in general. The safeguard is checking the specific work in front of you, no matter who did it, no matter how long you've known them, no matter how many real and genuine things they've done to earn your good opinion. Check the work. That's all he was telling me. I check mine now. I've thought a lot about what my father wrote in that last notebook entry. Not the part about the money, not the part about Gordon, but the part where he said, "I kept hoping I was wrong about Gordon. I've known him 16 years. 16 years. That's not naivety. That's not weakness. That's what happens when someone spends 16 years doing just enough of the right things to earn a position inside your trust, and then uses that position carefully, slowly, in ways you're not designed to notice because you've already decided who they are. What Gordon did was a deliberate calculation. He chose my father specifically because my father was organized, careful, and private. Those weren't vulnerabilities in the ordinary sense. They were qualities that Gordon turned into vulnerabilities. My father's carefulness made him less likely to ask for a second opinion. His privacy meant fewer people looking over his shoulder. His trust, earned through years of genuine interaction, meant that when something felt off, he questioned himself before he questioned Gordon. That's the part that stays with me. My father noticed. He noticed early, before his health declined, before the strokes. He wrote it down. He drove to Gordon's office and asked direct questions. He pulled out his own copy of the contract and found the discrepancy. He did everything right, and he still lost time because the hardest thing in the world is to act decisively against someone you've built a genuine relationship with, someone who attended your wife's funeral, someone whose name you said out loud at family dinners, as an example of a person you could count on. There's a version of this story where my father goes to the police 12 months earlier, and his outcome is different. I've sat with that version. I've had to put it down because there's no useful place for me to live inside it. What I've kept instead is the other thing he wrote. Check the work. It doesn't matter how good a man's reputation is. You still check the work. He spent his career saying that to people on job sites. He meant it about framing and wiring and load calculations. He also meant it about everything else, I think. He just hadn't fully applied it to the people managing his money, because that felt like distrust. And distrust felt like ingratitude towards someone who had been, for a long time, genuinely good at his job. The intelligence my father had wasn't the problem. The ethics of the people around him was the problem. But the lesson he left me wasn't about them. It was about me, about what I do with the information in front of me when it makes me uncomfortable. When something feels off, you don't wait for certainty. You document it. You ask the question. You get a second set of eyes on it. Not because everyone is dishonest, but because the cost of checking is low and the cost of not checking can be everything. Wolf Geary drove my father to a cardiology appointment. He waved from the driveway every morning. He also answered questions about my father's finances for money, and didn't let himself think too hard about why someone was paying him to do that. That's not a monster. That's a man who chose the easier thing and dressed it up as something smaller than it was. The harm that comes from people like Walt isn't dramatic. It's quiet and ordinary, and it compounds over time, which is exactly what makes it so difficult to see until it's already done its work. My father saw it. He wrote it down. He put it in a box and trusted me to find it and finish what he started. I try to be worth that trust every day. I don't always manage it, but I check the work. That much I can do.